Now I'm always down for a Western, especially if it's modern, so I was excited to check out the new Hindi Netflix modern Western thriller Thar. That is a mouthful, but saddle up, partner, and let's mosey on over to discuss this. Sorry. A veteran cop sees the chance to prove himself when murder and a grisly torture shake the walls of a sleepy desert town. So when this started off, it had sort of a No Country for Old Men vibe to it. Now, they're not the same story-wise, but the tone does retain a bit of that Coen brothers masterpiece. This is a modern Western that takes place in the mid-80s in Rajasthan, located near the India and Pakistan border. And we have two storylines taking place that both intersect with a police inspector. Now, this is a surprisingly violent film that opens up with a couple of crazy sequences that then don't get much explanation. But what's going on becomes very evident pretty quickly, well, at least for the most part. So the police inspector begins by investigating the death of a man out in just the middle of nowhere, and then he begins another investigation into a couple of murders. He's also then working on a case involving some drug smugglers, which puts him at risk just due to the nature of following up on clues involving those smugglers. Now, it seems that at every turn, he runs into roadblocks, either from people that are unwilling to talk, or because there's just simply a lack of information. As the investigation is underway, this mysterious businessman named Siddharth arrives in the town. Now, he's very quiet, barely speaking, even when asked direct questions. And he certainly has this air of intrigue to him, and for a while, his motivations, they remain a complete mystery. But also being a businessman, he has come to hire some workers to help him. But in this, he also meets the wife of one of the men that he comes to hire. And she's also very quiet and meek, but Siddharth appears to be kind, or maybe it's just indifference. He's not rude, but he's also not emotive or demonstrative with just about anybody. And compared to the other Hindi films that I've seen, this one is relatively short, at just an hour and 48 minutes. But even though the runtime is shorter, it's packed with a lot of suspense and tension. And once we begin to see the plot points unfold, the imagery and content, they become pretty intense. And this is where the violence part really kicks into gear. Now, while not every bit of the actual violence is shown, we certainly understand what's happening, and then we get to see a lot of the aftermath. But at points, we also get to see the brutality that is unleashed on certain people, and it is gnarly and gross. And I was totally enthralled. Mostly because even at this point, I didn't know why the violence was being inflicted. The story does a good job of building the mystery around the characters first. Even though we get very little actual development on who the characters are, we get a good sense of who they are. We can see their demeanors and then judge whether they're impish or admirable. And when a character is a slimeball, it's very evident. And then when a character is noble, it's very evident too. Now, I mentioned that there are a couple of storylines that are playing out that all involve the police inspector. The one involving the drug smugglers is probably the least interesting and the least engaging because it really doesn't get much focus, even though it's used as a massive story device towards the latter portion of the film. Their inclusion in the story feels more shoehorned in to create some peripheral conflict. And because they're not given much plot attention, say for a couple of random moments, it almost could be that there was more story involving them, but it was cut just to make the narrative more direct. The emotions and actions surrounding the smugglers, they do make complete sense. So it's not a matter of not understanding how they fit into the story. It's really just that they get such a small amount of focus that when they pop up here and there and then are supposed to be menacing, the threat and the peril, they just feel disingenuous. The mystery of the man found dead in the middle of nowhere is really much more intriguing and the central story driver. While there's not much info on it, the investigation that the police investigator embarks on is really engaging. And we can feel his frustration at the small amount of forward progression that his case is making. Now, I do think that once we reach a certain point, even before the story reveals certain actions, we understand the motives and then why the man was found dead and in the middle of nowhere. It was obvious, but the tension was building so well that I didn't mind that I could figure out a bit of what was going on before the story laid it out all for us. The pacing in this is patient, but it's driving. There is this growing sense of dread, helped along by the brooding looks of Siddharth and the urgency that the inspector seems to be feeling to solve the crimes. Now, the landscapes in this are desolate and they're daunting, but they have a sense of beauty to them. The cracked desert ground, it just stretches for miles and miles, leading to small mountains with ruined fortresses. And now, while those could provide a sense of solace, their appearance really is more ominous than secure. And this is all captured by some wonderful cinematography. The filmmaking is awesome to watch, showcasing the serenity of certain moments, but then transitioning to faster-paced action and then conveying the excitement of shootouts or chases. The musical score also reminds me a lot of American Western movies. They still have an Indian flair to them, but it has recognizable qualities that just signal a Western in my mind. So overall, Thar is a modern Western with a dark and brutal story at its heart. The characters are captivating, especially Siddharth, who is constantly shrouded in mystery. The cinematography is also beautiful, enhancing the ominous tone of the story, which is then complemented by the musical score, adding a very Western aesthetic. And while not all of the story elements are engaging, there's enough here to make for a really entertaining watch. There's sex, no nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of violence, including sexual assault. I give Thar 3.5 out of 5 couches. So these past few weeks, I've been watching the modern Western Outer Range on Amazon. But what's a modern Western that you enjoy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.